It's been 2 weeks since the party, and I'm beginning to think that my own time might be getting short. I've had a shadow for the past few days, and it appears that the holder of my string might have found me. I blame the newscast for this, but I can't say I wasn't blameless. I let myself get swept up in my own small celebrity. I got sloppy, and it came back to bite me. It appears I've made myself an easy target. A few days after Gabe's party, I got a call from the local news outlet. They wanted to talk about Adriana's murder, and someone from the police department had leaked my information. I agreed to tell them what I could about it, and they set up a time and a place for the interview. Apparently, the story had really taken off after the interview with Adriana's mother, and the people were curious enough about it for them to squeeze more ratings out of it. I had remained mostly uncommented on by anyone that wasn't at my high school until this point, but that was about to change. My dad let me borrow a suit, since the one I owned was a size too small. As he helped me into the sleek black suit he used for presentations, I felt pretty sharp. This was easily the best I had felt my entire life, and I was still riding the high of helping Lisa at the party. My celebrity at school had soared after that, as word got around that I had stopped her ex from kidnapping her. It seemed that I couldn't walk 2 feet without seeing a red string or an orange string, or a hopeful blue string trying to attach itself to me. I likely looked like the aforementioned popular girl, with my web of connections zipping off in every which way, and I had to stop myself from looking lest I give myself a headache these days. I was on top of the world, and I couldn't see how I could ever come down again. Though, when I saw the black string that stretched off into nowhere, I remembered that there was at least one person out there with less than friendly interests. The interview went about as well as expected. The spin was very positive. Local boy arrives at crime scene in time to comfort dying girl, and the reporter was more than a little flattering. As usual, I didn't mention the strings. I stuck with the same story I had given the police. I had been walking and saw the man dragging a struggling girl from his van into the warehouse. I had been nervous, thinking about calling emergency services, before finding my nerve and plunging into the building to try to help her. I had arrived too late to call for help, and sat with her in her last moments. The news anchor had theatrically wiped her eyes and told me how brave I was. I just sort of nodded and told her that it was nice of her to say so, but I was only doing what anyone should have done in that situation. The interview wrapped up, and as the cameras cut, she thanked me and told me she was sorry for what I had endured. Finding that poor girl like that, I can't imagine how that must haunt you. On that note, she had no idea. A few days later, I saw the van. I believe the first time might have been a coincidence. I was walking home, Mark buzzing in my ear about something, when I saw the van driving in the opposite direction. The windows were tinted, the driver a little more than an outline, but I noticed when he craned his neck around to look at me. I felt a prickle run up my back. He had nearly broken his damn neck trying to get a look at me, but I put it out of my mind. So what? Maybe he recognized me from the news broadcast. It was no big deal. As Mark told me bye, it brought me back to reality. He left for his house, and left me to walk the 3 blocks to my own. I hadn't been walking long when I heard a soft voice from nowhere. "You have a shadow." I jumped a little and tried not to look around. Adriana hadn't popped in for a chat since that night with Lisa, and her intrusion was a little worrying. I couldn't honestly believe there was a ghost girl hanging out in my head, but did that make her a manifestation of my own intuition or something? Some kind of Jiminy Cricket conscience voice that lived in my noggin? What was she, and why did she keep popping up? "That van looks familiar, kinda like the one that he pulled me into." I didn't dare look behind me, but I could hear tires driving slowly over pavement. This wasn't real. I had seen a van and just psyched myself out. If I turned around right now, I'd probably just see a mail truck or a taxi pulling up to someone's house. There was no proof that the vehicle behind me was the same van at all. But there wasn't any proof that it wasn't. "I'd cut down this road. He's getting closer." I cut down the alley before I could think about it too much. I heard the vehicle roll on as I sped up, making my way between 2 streets. The alley was too narrow for the van to fit, but I was sure that it would double back and come for me on the adjoining street. I could hear the sound of tires accelerating, and I would likely come out of the alley just in time for them to run me over. I had started to panic when I looked down and saw the very thing that would likely send me over the edge. The black string was rotating, following the course of the van. "Duck behind the dumpster and stay absolutely still." Adriana's whisper was deathly quiet, a pale whisper, and I found myself ducking behind the dumpster before I could stop myself. From my vantage point, I could see it roll past slowly, the driver scouting the alley. I peeked from between the pair of trash cans, waiting for it to pass with slow deliberation. I couldn't see much through the tinted windows, but that black string sticking from the doorway told me all I needed to know. It was no coincidence that he was so close to my house. I would need to take steps to ensure that he never learned where I lived. He had found me, maybe through luck or maybe not, and decided that I needed to be silenced. I stayed hidden there next to that stinking dumpster until I saw him take a left and drive towards Mark's neighborhood. Then I booked it for home as fast as I could. I got home and slammed the door, throwing all the locks before running upstairs. My guardian angel didn't speak up, so I figured I might be in the clear for the time being. I wasn't sure what to do about this, my mind tripping over 1,000 different possibilities. I could tell my parents, but would they believe me? I had no proof that he had done anything, and if the police searched his van and found nothing, it would ruin my credibility. I could go to the police, but that would amount to the same thing as telling my parents. They might also decide that I was looking for attention, or trying to divert them from myself and decide that I was the real killer. My afternoon became a steady slog between the window and my door, racking my brain for some way out of this. I would check the window, look down on the street for the van, cross to my desk and pick up my notepad, then walk to the door so I could tell my parents before throwing up my hands and doing it all over again. The one person I could have talked to about this was as silent as the grave, which was fitting since that's where she now resided. He let me stew like this for 4 days, until he finally struck. I hadn't seen the van since the first time, but I felt like he was still around. It's hard to explain, but I would get these feelings of eyes watching me, and I would suddenly change my course and walk another way. I cut through people's yards, went to friends' houses only to leave through their backyard, and took roundabout ways so I could get home without being seen. That worked for a few days, but on Thursday, it was raining. Mark's dad had picked him up for a doctor's appointment, but my dad was stuck at work. Mom was getting some things from the market, and I didn't want to stay out in the open waiting for her to come and get me. I started running, kicking up puddles as I went, and by the halfway point I was completely soaked. I kept looking around like a fitful deer, sure that the headlights of a van would find me any minute. I would hear the engine roar suddenly, and the last thing I would see were those headlights and the grill as it rolled over me, silencing me forever. Maybe my mom would find me on her way back from the store. Maybe a passerby would come and hold my hand like I had for Adriana. Either way, I'd be too dead to care. The puddles exploded around my feet like landmines, but I barely noticed as they soaked through my sneakers. I was running flat out, my chest heaving and my heart thumping. My adrenaline was high, and I knew that I just had to make it home before he found me. He had discovered the general vicinity of my neighborhood, and the last thing I wanted to do was lead him right to my house. But it was so wet out, and I just couldn't stay in it for long. When I turned onto my street, my porch light in sight, I thought I was home free. When headlights flooded the other end of the road, the GMC logo standing out on that white panel van, I knew I hadn't. We stood, looking at each other like a pair of duelists. I heard his wheels screech in the deep puddle when I took off running. I was 50 feet from my yard when his tires found purchase. I could feel my sneakers squelching on the pavement, but I put on a burst of speed as his van sped towards me. He was sending up water in buckets, his van plowing down the road like a white bullet. I could see the front porch getting closer and closer, the light glimmering wetly through the pouring rain, but its proximity was no comfort. The van was getting bigger and bigger as it raced towards me, and I was easily 20 feet away as its headlights blazed maliciously. I closed my eyes as my feet sank into the grass in my yard, my foot catching as I stumbled onto the soggy grass. My craggy yard ended up saving my life that day. As I tripped, I rolled across the grass, sliding to a stop on my face. The van drove over the spot I had tripped in a second later, and I heard the screech of tires as he nearly flipped his van on the wet road. He hit the brakes, the car sliding and barely avoiding hitting a tree. As he gained control of his vehicle, he squealed to a stop in the middle of the road, the rain pattering on his van as it steamed. I was dazed, but I kept enough wits to get to my feet and stumble for the door. My keys hung in my pocket, my roar ripping up my throat as I tore my pants getting them out. I could hear his door creaking open, his boots slapping at the turf as he came after me, and I knew that I had seconds to get the door between us. I could see him in my mind's eye, a knife or a piece of wood in his hand, with that sick grin spread across his face, like he always had when I remembered that day. The string would be thrumming between us, seeing its moment at hand as I came within inches of death. I shoved the door open and careened inside, slamming it behind me as I threw every lock I could find. I looked down to see that the string was indeed thrumming, pulsing a midnight tone, as the man beat on the door with his fist. He screamed at me to let him in. He screamed at me to accept my fate. He screamed a lot of things at me as the rain beat down around the house, but I just backed away and reached into my pocket for the phone. I'd call the police and they'd have him. He couldn't hide now. I had him dead to rights, and they couldn't say I was looking for attention when My hand came back empty. I fumbled in my pocket for nearly a minute before seeing it through the big front window and realizing I had lost it in the tumble. My parents had no house phone. No one I knew had a house phone, and I had no way to connect with anyone without my phone. Unless I could get to my computer. If I could get upstairs and message my friends, they could call the cops for me. I looked at the stairs, my legs still aching, and saw the 23 steps as something akin to Everest. My chest hurt, my lungs ached, and my legs had been torn up from the tumble across the yard. I could feel the adrenaline ebbing out, and I didn't feel capable of walking to the couch, let alone up the stairs. Either way, it was the only way I was going to get any help, and I steeled myself for the climb as I took that first step towards the stairs. My adrenaline pushed itself back to the surface when I heard the door to the back porch smash open. It appeared I had less time left than I thought. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Let's go ahead and thank our sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. I've got some new tiers up on Patreon if you'd like to check them out. As some of you may or may not know, I do open commissions on, lots of writing things, both spicy and non-spicy. So, I've got a few tiers up for writing commissions and voice work commissions. So, if that's something you feel you might be interested in, come on down to Patreon and look me up. I've also got plenty of books on Amazon. I've got a new one coming out in July. That'll be my 4th year compilation. So come on down and pick you up a couple. I've got a tier for that on Patreon too, where you get a book as soon as I write it, signed and in your mailbox. So what are you waiting for? Come on and get you some good reading material. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.